Adam, as you mentioned earlier, reliability is a lot more than just making sure the data stream gets through, making sure the data is getting where it needs to go. It's about quality as well. And of course, in a panel about live streaming, we have to talk about latency. And what role does latency play in video quality? In terms of audience demand? I mean, are audiences really demanding the kinds of ultra low and almost real-time latencies that we hear so many solutions providers talking about? Or would they, is picture quality and audio quality still first and foremost, and if you got to lose a little on the latency side, you can. Brian?
Yeah, latency is a massively complex topic. I love talking about. You got the latency on the ingest, you got the latency on the delivery, which is what a lot of people talk about. Streaming takes 30, 40, 50 seconds. I do have some data, I'll talk about that in a second. But then you also have the latency in the middle, the different encoding. If you're doing mixing, there's that. And then from the master control, and I think also production control would have to grapple with this, you then have the latency of like the microseconds, if you will, between when I wanted to have the chyron up on the baseball player who's walking off the field. And so it's, again, complicated, but it's getting better. And I think, so back on the delivery side, what I love is, it's a free ad-supported streaming TV. One of the things that is known in the business is getting the data back, the viewership back from all these different platforms is hard to do. So one of the things that I love to talk about is zero data, which is how do you get data when you don't have any? Well, QR code, two-screen applications can get you some really high integrity data. In order for those to work and really be a delightful experience, you need to get the latency down to at least to like over-the-air broadcast, I think. I mean, I think it's even better down to 3 or 4 seconds. So we are very, we at Amagi, we aren't currently, there really is sort of a whole separate topic on low latency. I'll just put it this way. We're in a beta with AWS. There's other companies in this beta, so it's not just us, but NBA just announced in their app that they were going to support low latency. And so, I probably said this every year for 5 years, but next year, I'm pretty sure low latency. And just to cap it off, look, it's not the most important thing, but it's also not unimportant. And people care about it, and those people that care are, males 30 to 50 watching sports that want to bet, and you know what? If it's laggy, you're going to hear about it on Twitter. So I think it's really important. It's one of those things that we just need to do, and but the actual use cases where it matters, it's narrower, right?
Right.
So that's my.
Well, I think you touched briefly on it, to me, the generalization where I think, a few years ago we all like, oh, it's all going to go low latency. Everyone wants it really. Yeah, okay, maybe not quite so much. There are key use cases, absolute. Betting is one of the biggest driving forces that we see. That's not an option. It's a key requirement, and that's when we're talking very, very low latency. Preferably, closest to real time as we get, sub 3 seconds, absolutely. Oftentimes, the broader spectrum, to me, even before, we saw a lot of push, we want to match broadcast, right? There's the whole concept of I don't want to hear my neighbors cheering next door when I'm still waiting to see, if they're going to take the shot. And that's still an element, but honestly, it seems like it's also tapered down a lot. A lot of what we were able to do just in tuning the traditional streaming to draw that latency so it's not the 50 seconds and so forth as much, has taken that to a point that seems more acceptable. But there's still a drive to some regard. I just don't think oftentimes it's worth the risk that it takes with the infrastructure, the challenges, and ultimately you have less buffer in the literal sense of that too, of when there are issues and challenges that arise, what the implications are to the end users and to the systems. And I think a key point also, though, the low latency stuff in the media workflow coming in, your ingest and so forth, that's become critical, and now there's new technologies and different ways that that's being applied, and that's incredibly valuable, but that's not what end users see.
Does creating these low latency distributions, does that add to the cost too? I mean, does it mean more bandwidth or more expense?
It can. I mean, no matter what, it's more expense because it's something different and new. You have to retool. Even the client side work, the encoder packager work, those are elements that can come into play. Let alone what happens over the wire and what transpires there, what the how the CDNs are going to be handling it in different forms and technology. There's all different implications.
I think it's also there's the old joke that's out there, which is how fast you have to be to outrun a bear, and you have to be faster than your friend, right? It's about all you have to do. I find it's the same analysis when you get to low latency, because if somebody says, "Oh, I need low latency," But what are you comparing it to? Well, I'm comparing it to this broadcast that's 12 seconds off. Okay, so you can be 11 seconds and you've got low latency. So it's all about perception of what's the reality you're comparing it to. And I think for technologies that are truer low latency, like WebRTC today, our customers will come to us with use cases and they'll say, I'm trying to fly drones and I need to see the drone footage, and 300 milliseconds is all I can afford. That's true low latency, and we can support that. Then you get, but I'm only going to send that out to 100 people because the cost is going to be significant. It's just the way it works today with our technologies. WebRTC pricing is going to be astronomical because it's individual streams today, as opposed to the CDN costs of the, let's call it non-low latency. So you have to do a trade-off. Do you want to hit 1 million people, or do you want low latency? And today you can't, unfortunately, get both. So compare it to what the other side is doing, how fast you need it to be, and it can help you make a good decision.
Well, and that also, I mean, you say, the bear analogy, which I love. The question I would pose is something like NBA, depending on where they really lie in their low latency, does that actually help shift the industry, right? Is that now we have a new benchmark that, all right, well, they're doing it, crap, we got to, all right, we got to get, sub 7 second. Or whatever it may be. Those are the things I see actually when invoke these changes that we all end up having to kind of rally a bit more around, oftentimes, if it really applies and gets enough attention and has enough value.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, the technology's just got to be there. I mean, so far for us, the lowest low latency we could get non-WebRTC is going to be Dash, and we're going to be able to do something. We can get maybe 3 seconds off that, mostly reliable. But that's you're really tuning things to get there. Okay. So in my world, sub 3 seconds, it's a jump. Right. You go 3 if you're really, really good at it, and then you go down to 500 milliseconds and you switch to entirely technology stacks. Right. So in reality, you kind of have to pick what's your limit you're trying to go for.
Low latency is great. The problem is all the different client streaming technologies from a transport perspective. You have low latency HLS, you have MPEG Dash, you have what was AV1 back in the day, you have RTMP, WebRTC, you have all these different flavors that you could implement on the client side, but until there's really adoption of a common media format with CMAF, you really, from a DRM perspective, you can't really protect your content to some degree without having to introduce some latency in the pipeline. And that's a real bummer because now all of a sudden you can't really compete with the traditional linear distribution providers because your content is going through this encode decode on the rights management side. So until we can kind of really focus on low latency technology that's super supported across multiple device ecosystems, and it can utilize the same encryption algorithm, so you encrypt it once, send to your client, decrypt, playback, and we're going to constantly be chasing our tails playing whack-a-mole on what low latency really means.